On a cold December evening in 1999, somewhere in Southern California, a man sat alone in a weathered motorhome parked inside a warehouse. The vehicle was old, dented, unremarkable. The kind of thing you would expect to see at a campground or abandoned in a rural lot. But this motorhome belonged to one of the wealthiest men in California. His name was Guy Snyder, and in just a few hours, he would be gone forever. Outside those warehouse walls stood an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. An empire built on simple hamburgers, fresh ingredients, and a promise of quality that had made his family name legendary across the American West. But inside that motorhome, surrounded by shadows and silence, Guy Snyder was fighting a battle he had been losing for decades. A battle against pain, against addiction, against the ghosts of a childhood he could never escape. When dawn broke the next morning, the heir to the In-N-Out burger fortune was found lifeless. He was 48 years old, and with his passing, a 17-year-old girl became the sole inheritor of one of America's most beloved fast food empires. But to understand how this family reached such a tragic crossroads, we must travel back half a century, to a tiny hamburger stand in Baldwin Park, California, to a man named Harry Snyder, and to the dreams he built, one burger at a time. The man who built an empire from nothing. Harry Snyder was born on September 9, 1913, in Vancouver, Canada, to Dutch immigrant parents named Hendrik and Mary. His childhood was anything but privileged. The family struggled through poverty, and young Harry learned early that survival required hard work, determination, and an unwillingness to give up. But there was something else in Harry's past, something darker that would echo through generations. According to his granddaughter Lindsay, who revealed the family's painful history decades later, Harry grew up in a household marked by abuse. His own father had suffered similar treatment, creating a cycle of pain that passed from generation to generation. It was a wound that never fully healed. As a young man, Harry moved with his family to Seattle and eventually to Santa Monica, California. He worked odd jobs wherever he could find them, learning the value of every dollar earned through sweat and sacrifice. When World War II erupted, Harry tried to serve his country, but a perforated eardrum disqualified him from overseas duty. Instead, he worked desk jobs at various Army and Navy bases up and down the West Coast. It was honest work, but Harry dreamed of something more. After the war ended, Harry found himself working for a catering company in Seattle, delivering pre-made boxed lunches to military base cafeterias. One of those cafeterias was at Fort Lawton, and there, in 1947, fate intervened. The cafeteria was managed by a young woman named Esther Lavelle Johnson. Esther was everything Harry was not. Where he was rough around the edges, she was refined. Where he had street smarts, she had book learning. Born in 1920 in Sorrento, Illinois, Esther was one of 8 children. She had served her country during World War II as a surgical nurse in the Women Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service, known as WAVES. After the war, she attended Seattle Pacific University, studying zoology while working at the base cafeteria. When the tall, determined Harry Snyder walked through those cafeteria doors carrying boxes of sandwiches, something clicked between them. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. Harry was tough and demanding, but Esther softened his rougher edges. He was a maverick and a visionary. She was grounded and practical, but most importantly, they shared something that would define their entire lives together: a generosity of spirit and a belief that hard work could build something lasting. They married in 1948, and almost immediately, they made a decision that would change fast food history forever. They would move to Southern California and open their own hamburger stand. The birth of a California legend. On October 22, 1948, Harry and Esther Snyder opened the first In-N-Out Burger in Baldwin Park, California. The location was at the intersection of Francisquito Avenue and Garvey Boulevard, a modest spot in a working-class suburb of Los Angeles. Their initial investment was just $5,000, and they had a partner named Charlie Nodden to help share the risk. The stand itself was barely 100 square feet, tiny, cramped, and unremarkable to anyone passing by. But what happened inside that small space would revolutionize an entire industry. Harry had a vision that seemed almost absurd at the time. He wanted customers to be able to order their food and receive it without ever leaving their cars. In post-war California, most hamburger stands relied on car hops who walked out to vehicles, took orders, and delivered food on trays. It was slow, inefficient, and Harry believed there had to be a better way. So he began tinkering. Night after night, after long days of cooking burgers and serving customers, Harry went home to his garage and experimented. He was not a trained electrician or engineer. He was simply a determined man who refused to accept that something was impossible just because no one had done it before. And finally, after months of trial and error, he created something revolutionary. A two-way speaker box. The device was simple in concept, but transformative in practice. Customers could pull their cars up to the speaker, place their orders directly with the cook, and then drive forward to receive their food. No more waiting for car hops. No more miscommunicated orders. Just fast, efficient service that matched the name Harry had chosen for his business. In-N-Out. At first, customers did not understand the new system. Harry had to post signs explaining how to use the speaker. Some people were nervous about talking to a box. Others tried to fiddle with the switches and buttons, threatening to break the delicate equipment. The speakers even became targets for theft. During the hot rod era of the late 1940s and 50s, those speaker boxes were coveted as car radio accessories. Harry had to have his employees lock them up every single night. But despite the challenges, the concept worked. Customers loved the speed and convenience, and more importantly, they loved the food. From the very first day, Harry insisted on quality that was almost fanatical. Every morning before dawn, he personally visited the local meat markets and produced stands, hand-selecting the freshest ingredients. He wanted lettuce straight off the ground, tomatoes fresh from the vine, onions picked that very morning. The burgers were never frozen. The fries were cut from whole potatoes right in the kitchen. Everything was prepared fresh, by hand, for every single customer. In their first month of operation, the Snyders sold around 2,000 hamburgers. Word spread quickly through Baldwin Park and the surrounding communities. This was not ordinary fast food. This was something special. The family grows alongside the business. In 1951, the Snyders opened their second location in Covina, California. The same year, Esther gave birth to their first son, whom they named Harry Guy Snyder, though everyone would call him Guy. A year later, in 1952, their second son arrived. They named him Richard Allen Snyder, but he would be known simply as Rich. The two boys could not have been more different. From their earliest years, they seemed to occupy opposite ends of the personality spectrum. Rich was the dutiful one, the responsible child who followed rules and helped with homework without being asked. Guy was the rebel, drawn to speed, excitement, and the thrill of pushing boundaries. Rich stayed close to his parents, learning the family business from the inside. Guy preferred the racetrack, where the roar of engines drowned out everything else. The Snyder boys grew up working in their parents' restaurants. It was not optional. Harry believed that everyone in the family needed to understand every aspect of the business, from mopping floors to flipping burgers to balancing the books. The boys started young, learning that success was built through effort, not entitlement. But there was something else the boys inherited. Something that came from Harry's troubled past. The cycle of pain that had marked his own childhood cast shadows over his sons in ways that would not become clear until much later. The family never spoke publicly about what happened behind closed doors. But decades later, when the In-N-Out Foundation was established to combat child abuse, the connection between the Snyder family history and their chosen cause would become unmistakably clear. By the late 1950s, the family had moved from Baldwin Park to a larger house in San Dimas, an upper-middle-class community in the San Gabriel Valley. The business was thriving, with new locations opening carefully and strategically across Southern California. Harry refused to expand too quickly. He refused to franchise. He refused to buy anything on credit. Every new restaurant was funded with cash, and every location was chosen with meticulous care. The Snyders became friends with Carl Karcher, founder of Carl's Jr., who provided valuable business advice in those early years. But despite the friendship, Harry charted his own course. He believed that maintaining control over every aspect of the operation was the only way to ensure quality. It was a philosophy that would define In-N-Out for generations to come. The hot rod culture of the 1950s made In-N-Out a natural gathering place for young people. The drive-through lanes were perfect for showing off classic cars, and the quality food at affordable prices kept customers coming back. By the 1960s, surfers had replaced hot rodders as the dominant youth culture, but In-N-Out remained just as popular. Celebrities like Lucille Ball and Bob Hope became regular customers when traveling from Los Angeles to their second homes in Palm Springs. Through it all, Harry maintained his fanatical dedication to freshness and quality. He still woke before dawn to personally inspect meat and produce. He still believed that treating employees well was just as important as treating customers well. In-N-Out paid above-average wages from the very beginning, and Harry made sure his workers knew they were valued. The question of inheritance. As the 1970s approached, Harry Snyder faced an increasingly difficult decision. Both of his sons were now adults, and both had very different relationships with the family business. Rich, the younger son, had been involved in company finances since he was 17 years old. He would skip social outings with friends because he was busy doing the books. He understood the business intimately, from the ground up, and he shared his father's dedication to quality and careful growth. Guy, the older son, was a different story entirely. His passion was racing. Fast cars, faster motorcycles, the adrenaline rush of competition. He loved the Irwindale Raceway, where his father had once owned a stake, and he spent as much time there as he could. But there was something else about Guy, something that worried his parents deeply. In the mid-1970s, Guy had a terrible motorcycle accident. The injuries left him in chronic pain, and the painkillers prescribed to manage that pain became something far more dangerous. An addiction that would shadow him for the rest of his life. Harry watched his two sons and made a decision that would shape the family's future. Despite being the younger brother, Rich was clearly the heir apparent. He was the corporate type, the responsible one, the son who shared Harry's vision for controlled, quality-focused growth. Guy was the wild one, struggling with demons that Harry understood all too well. The cycle of pain was continuing. Harry Snyder died of lung cancer on December 14, 1976. He was 63 years old. Despite having quit smoking many years earlier, the damage had been done. When he passed, In-N-Out had 18 locations spread across Southern California, and its reputation for excellence was unmatched in the fast food industry. As expected, 24-year-old Rich Snyder became president of the company. Esther, still the controlling shareholder, became secretary-treasurer, and Guy was given the title of executive vice president. A bone thrown to the older brother who had been passed over for leadership. It was a decision that made business sense, but it also planted seeds of resentment and pain that would bear bitter fruit in the years to come. The golden era of Rich Snyder. From 1976 onward, Rich Snyder proved himself a worthy successor to his father's legacy. He shared Harry's dedication to quality and his belief in treating employees as family, but he also brought new ideas and energy to the growing company. One of Rich's first major initiatives was establishing a commissary at the In-N-Out headquarters in Baldwin Park. This central facility allowed the company to receive, store, and ship equipment and food supplies to all its restaurants, giving In-N-Out complete quality control over every ingredient. Hamburger patties were formed on site. Potatoes were inspected for blemishes. Equipment was maintained to exacting standards. Nothing left the commissary unless it met Rich Snyder's approval. In 1983, Rich founded In-N-Out University, a training school for new managers that reinforced the company's core values and ensured uniformity across all locations. He believed that running a successful fast food business was not about cutting corners or buying the right equipment. It was about people management, and you could not manage people effectively unless you trained them properly. Rich was deeply religious, a devout evangelical Christian whose faith influenced every aspect of his life. In 1985, he began printing Bible verses on In-N-Out's paper goods. Small citations like John 3:16 and Proverbs 3:5 appeared on the bottom of drink cups and the wrappers that held burgers together. Some observers predicted the move would hurt business. Instead, customers simply accepted it as another quirk of a company that had always done things differently. The expansion continued carefully and methodically, exactly as Harry would have wanted. In June 1988, In-N-Out opened its 50th location in Thousand Palms. In 1990, the first San Diego County restaurant opened. In 1992, the chain crossed state lines for the first time, opening its 80th location in Las Vegas. A year later, the first Northern California restaurant opened in Modesto. Rich's philosophy was simple but revolutionary in the fast food industry. When a consultant once suggested that cutting salaries could save the company a fortune, Rich was furious. The very idea contradicted everything In-N-Out stood for. When he recounted the story later, his contempt was palpable. That, he said, was exactly the kind of advice you would get from a guy who wears a suit and thinks you do not pay a guy who cooks hamburgers that much money. Under Rich's leadership, In-N-Out created an expansive benefits package that was almost unheard of in fast food. Part-time workers received free meals, paid vacations, 401k plans, and flexible schedules. The company paid the highest wages in the industry because Rich believed happy, well-treated employees made better food and provided better service. And he was right. In-N-Out's employee turnover was dramatically lower than its competitors, and the consistency of its products became legendary. In 1984, Rich and his mother, Esther, established the Child Abuse Foundation, which would later become the In-N-Out Burger Foundation. The cause was deeply personal. The cycle of abuse that had marked Harry's family for generations had to end. Rich was determined that the Snyder fortune would be used to help children who suffered as his father had suffered. The foundation provided residential treatment, emergency shelter, foster care, and early intervention for abused children. Every cent raised went directly to the cause, with In-N-Out covering 100% of administrative costs. By December 1993, In-N-Out had grown to 93 locations. Rich had expanded the company fivefold, while maintaining the quality and values his parents had established. He had hired a team of excellent executives and was planning to relocate the company's headquarters to a site closer to his coastal mansion. At 41 years old, he seemed poised to lead In-N-Out into its next golden era. And then, in a single terrible moment, everything changed. The December night that shattered everything. On December 15, 1993, Rich Snyder was returning from a one-day trip to 5 In-N-Out locations, including the newly opened 93rd restaurant in Fresno. It had been a busy but satisfying day. The new store was performing well, and Rich was pleased with what he had seen. He was not traveling alone. With him were Philip West, In-N-Out's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, and Jack Sims, a consultant and close friend. The three men had chartered an IAI Westwind business jet for the trip, with experienced pilots Stephen Barkin and John Otis McDaniel at the controls. There was a company rule. Rich and Phil West were never supposed to fly together. The reasoning was simple and morbid. If something happened to the plane, the company could not afford to lose both of its top executives at once. But on this particular day, for reasons that would never be explained, the rule was broken. The Westwind departed Brackett Field in Laverne at 5:13 in the afternoon, heading south toward John Wayne Airport in Orange County. The weather was clear. The flight should have been routine. But as the small jet approached the runway, it was following a much larger aircraft, a Boeing 757 operated by United Airlines. What happened next would change aviation safety regulations forever. The 757 and the Westwind were both cleared for visual approaches, with the smaller jet trailing behind the commercial airliner. But the pilots of the Westwind may not have fully understood the danger they faced. Wake turbulence, the invisible spinning vortices of air created by large aircraft, can be powerful enough to flip smaller planes out of control. The Boeing 757, despite being classified as a narrow-body aircraft, creates wake turbulence nearly as powerful as much larger wide-body jets. This was a known safety concern, but it had not been adequately addressed. As the Westwind descended through approximately 1,100 feet above sea level, it flew directly into the 757's wake. The small jet rolled violently, entering a steep, uncontrolled descent. The pilots had no time to recover. At 5:33 in the evening, the aircraft slammed into the ground near the intersection of State Route 55 and Edinger Avenue in Santa Ana. The impact was catastrophic. The plane exploded in flames, killing everyone on board instantly. Rich Snyder was 41 years old. He had never had children. His life's work, his faith, his dedication to quality and to his employees, all of it ended in a ball of fire on a December evening. The news devastated the company. In-N-Out released an understated tribute that captured who Rich had been. He was the type of person who did a lot more than just talk about taking care of his associates. He nurtured them and wanted them to know how very important they are to the success of the company. Thanks to Richard Snyder, In-N-Out Burger is a great place to work. Just the day before the crash, Rich had been in Northern California to see his 10-year-old niece, Lindsay, perform in a pageant. While at the pageant, he had spoken with his brother, Guy. The two men had barely been on speaking terms for many years, their relationship strained by Guy's struggles and the old wounds of being passed over for leadership. But on that day, the brothers had talked. It would be their final conversation. The investigation into the crash led to significant changes in aviation safety. The Federal Aviation Administration eventually reclassified the Boeing 757 as a heavy jet and issued new, stricter guidelines for aircraft separation. The tragedy that killed Rich Snyder would at least prevent similar accidents in the future. But for the Snyder family, no regulation could ease the pain. And for Guy Snyder, the burden of leadership was about to descend on shoulders that were already breaking. A reluctant leader struggles. In January 1994, Guy Snyder assumed the presidency of In-N-Out Burger. He was 42 years old, grieving his brother, and fighting a battle against addiction that he had been losing for decades. Many people feared the worst. They thought the rogue brother, the wild one, would turn everything upside down. They worried that In-N-Out's careful, quality-focused approach would be abandoned for faster growth or cheaper ingredients. But something remarkable happened. Thanks to the strong executive infrastructure Rich had built, the company continued to thrive. Guy may have been an unlikely president, but he was not incompetent. He understood quality as well as anyone in the family. It was in his blood. And he was not about to let his father's legacy or his brother's memory be destroyed on his watch. Under Guy's leadership, In-N-Out's aggressive expansion continued. The 100th restaurant opened in Gilroy, California on November 10, 1994, less than a year after Rich's death. An acclaimed architect named Stephen Canner designed a landmark In-N-Out location in Westwood, adjacent to UCLA, with an angular design that paid tribute to 1950s jet age architecture. Guy invested heavily in the company's quality assurance team, determined to maintain the freshness and consistency that had always defined In-N-Out. His fingerprints were all over the state-of-the-art quality controls that ensured every burger, every fry, every shake met the Snyder standard. The company's mysterious menu item known as the Flying Dutchman, 2 beef patties with cheese and nothing else, was named after Guy himself. It was his favorite order, a callback to his racing days and his Dutch heritage. For all his struggles, Guy loved In-N-Out with the same fierce devotion as his father and brother. But the addiction was always there, lurking in the shadows, pulling him down. Guy had a long history of substance abuse, dating back to that motorcycle accident in the mid-70s. The painkillers that were supposed to heal him had instead enslaved him. Over the years, his drug use spiraled out of control. There were periods of sobriety followed by devastating relapses, rehab stays that offered hope, but never permanent solutions. His daughter Lindsay remembered visiting him in what she thought was a hospital when she was 5 or 6 years old. It was only later that she understood it had been a rehabilitation facility. Her mother had simply told her that Daddy was sick. In 1997, Guy married his childhood friend, Kathy Touche. It was his second marriage, coming after a 17-year union with Lindsay's mother, Linda, had ended in divorce in 1991. The divorce had been devastating for young Lindsay, who was just 12 years old. Her father was her greatest source of love and attention, and the separation created a void she would spend years trying to fill. The second marriage was troubled from the start. Kathy later recalled that Guy would sometimes come to her restaurant, put on an apron, and help out. He was a simple man, she said, who enjoyed nothing more than sitting outside, eating a patty melt, and watching planes go by. But the demands of running a billion-dollar company and fighting addiction simultaneously were too much. The marriage ended in divorce in 1999. As Guy's addictions deepened, he began to withdraw from daily operations. He would disappear for weeks at a time, sometimes holing up in an old motorhome trailer that was parked inside a seldom-used In-N-Out warehouse in Baldwin Park. The same warehouse where his father had once hand-selected ingredients, the The same facility that was supposed to represent everything the company stood for. Now it sheltered a broken man hiding from the world. Esther Snyder, now in her late 70s, stepped up to manage day-to-day operations alongside the loyal executives who had served under Rich. Her title changed to president, while Guy became chairman of the board, though the distinction was largely symbolic. The real power lay with the team Rich had built and the mother who refused to let her family's business fail. By 1997, In-N-Out had grown to 124 locations. By 1998, the company marked its 50th anniversary with 134 restaurants. The Big Lebowski film that year featured memorable lines about In-N-Out, cementing its place in American pop culture. From the outside, everything looked fine, but inside, Guy was falling apart. In his final years, Guy had at least 3 drug overdoses and a heart attack. He was once picked up by police wandering the streets of a rough neighborhood, wearing sweatpants and an In-N-Out t-shirt. The officers assumed he was just another homeless drug addict. They had no idea they were dealing with the president of a major corporation, a man whose family fortune was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At the end, Guy was living in that motorhome outside a friend's house. The empire his parents had built from nothing. The restaurants serving millions of customers across the Southwest, the legacy of quality and care that stretched back to 1948, all of it belonged to him. And none of it could save him. On December 3rd, 1999, Guy Snyder died of congestive heart failure brought on by an accidental overdose of prescription painkillers. He was 48 years old. Esther Snyder was 79. She had now outlived her husband and both of her sons. The woman who had served as a surgical nurse in World War II, who had helped build a hamburger empire from 100 square feet of space in Baldwin Park, who had balanced books and formed patties and treated employees like family, now faced the unimaginable task of continuing alone. And somewhere in Northern California, a 17-year-old girl named Lindsay learned that she was now the sole surviving heir to the In-N-Out fortune, the youngest heir to a billion-dollar throne. Lindsay Snyder was born on May 5, 1982, in Glendora, California. She was Guy's daughter from his first marriage, and from her earliest memories, she was a daddy's girl. Guy was warm and affectionate, with a great sense of humor that made her feel special and loved. But her childhood was marked by pain. The visits to what she thought was a hospital, the strange absences, the arguments between her parents that she could hear through the walls, and then, at 12 years old, the divorce that ripped her family apart. She later learned that her father had an affair, which contributed to the marriage's collapse. The betrayal shattered her trust and left her longing for the attention and love that Guy had once provided so freely. When Guy died, Lindsay's world shattered completely. "My world shattered," she later said. "After my dad died, there was no way I was going to be alone. He was gone, so I had even greater reason to fill the void." She got married at 18, just months after high school graduation. "I knew it was not right," she admitted. "That small, still voice had told me, 'Do not do this.' And I did it. And I paid the price with a divorce." Then she got married again. She could not stand the thought of being alone. She started smoking marijuana and drinking, the very things she had wanted to stay away from after watching her father's struggles. She realized that she was following in his footsteps and that she would meet an early end if she did not find a different path. There were 3 marriages and 3 divorces. Each failed union drove her into the arms of another man because the loneliness was unbearable. There were also 2 kidnapping attempts, one when she was 17 and still in high school, and another when she was 24 and working in management at an In-N-Out distribution center. The second time, she had to run across a highway to escape attackers who had pulled up in a van with boarded-up windows. But through all the chaos, Lindsay was slowly learning the family business. In 1999, the same year her father died, she started working at In-N-Out. She was 17, and she knew that someday the company would be hers. But she did not want special treatment. She did not want to be handed anything she had not earned. So she waited in line for 2 hours at a job interview at a new restaurant in Redding, California, just like any other applicant. There was a stigma that came with being the owner's kid, she later explained. She wanted to be respected for doing things the right way. And slowly, she earned that respect. Over the next decade, Lindsay worked her way up through the company. By 24, she was a store manager. She learned every position, from the griddle to the register to the office. She understood the Flying Dutchman and the double-double, the spread made from a secret recipe that Harry had once mixed in a barrel using a wooden axe handle, the culture of quality and care that her grandparents had established in 1948. Meanwhile, Esther continued to guide the company as president. Under her leadership, In-N-Out expanded to Arizona and to Nevada cities beyond Las Vegas. The company kept growing, kept serving fresh burgers and hand-cut fries, kept treating employees like family. By 2006, there were over 200 locations. Then, on August 4, 2006, Esther Snyder passed away at 86 years old. The matriarch was gone, the last of the founders. The woman who had balanced books in a tiny hamburger stand and watched her creation grow into a billion-dollar empire. At her funeral, In-N-Out burgers were served. It was exactly what she would have wanted. The burden passes to a new generation. When Esther died, Lindsay was just 24 years old. She was not immediately given full control of the company. Instead, the presidency passed to Mark Taylor, a longtime vice president of operations, who was the first non-family member to hold the position. But everyone knew that Taylor was essentially a caretaker. The true heir was Lindsay. The transition was not smooth. In 2006, a lawsuit exposed internal divisions within the company. Richard Boyd, a longtime executive and co-trustee of company stock, accused Lindsay and allied executives of trying to force out the elderly Esther and attempting to seize control prematurely. Lindsay strenuously denied the allegations. In heartbreaking recorded conversations, a confused Esther could be heard saying that she thought they were taking all her friends away from her. The case was settled before Esther was forced to testify, and Boyd left the company after more than 20 years. Lindsay called his claims fabrications and expressed deep upset at the pain the lawsuit had caused her family. Lindsay gained control of 50% of the company when she turned 30 in 2012. She received nearly full control, 97%, when she turned 35 in 2017. At that moment, she became one of the youngest female billionaires in the world. But unlike so many heirs to great fortunes, Lindsay did not coast on her inheritance. She threw herself into running the company with the same dedication her grandparents had shown. In 2010, at 27 years old, she became president. She maintained the family's commitment to slow, careful growth. She refused to franchise. She refused to take the company public. When asked why, her answer was simple. The only reason we would do that is for the money, and I would not do it. My heart is totally connected to this company because of my family and the fact that they are not here. I have a strong tie to keep this the way they would want it. She fought to keep prices low even as costs rose. When California increased its minimum wage and other fast food chains raised prices dramatically, Lindsay sat in executive meetings going toe-to-toe with her team. "We cannot raise the prices that much. We cannot," she insisted. "Because I feel such an obligation to look out for our customer. When everyone else was taking these jumps, we were not." Her faith, the same evangelical Christianity that her Uncle Rich had embraced, became the center of her life. She found strength in Scripture, drawing comfort from stories of people in the Bible who had endured far worse than she had. She was not getting dragged through the street or hanged or flogged, she reasoned, so she could make it through. It could be worse. She established the Slave to Nothing Foundation to combat human trafficking and substance abuse, amplifying the work of the In-N-Out Foundation that her grandmother and uncle had started. The causes were deeply personal. She had watched addiction destroy her father. She was determined that the Snyder fortune would fight back against the forces that had stolen him from her. And finally, after 3 failed marriages, she found lasting love with Sean Ellingson, a former In-N-Out employee who understood the company and the weight she carried. They married, and together they worked to break the cycle of pain that had haunted the Snyder family for generations. The legacy lives on. Today, In-N-Out Burger has over 400 locations across California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Texas, Oregon, Colorado, Idaho, Washington, and Tennessee. The company generates billions of dollars in annual revenue and employs more than 36,000 people. Its burgers remain fresh, never frozen. Its fries are still cut from whole potatoes. Its employees still earn above-average wages and receive benefits that other fast food workers can only dream of. In 2014, a replica of the original 1948 hamburger stand was built near the original location in Baldwin Park. Visitors can step back in time, standing in a space barely 100 square feet, imagining Harry Snyder tinkering with his 2-way speaker system, while Esther balanced the books at their home around the corner. The crossed palm trees that mark every In-N-Out location, inspired by Harry's favorite scene from the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, still form their distinctive X pattern. The yellow arrow in the logo still points to pride. The Bible verses still appear on the packaging. And the secret menu, with its animal-style burgers and Flying Dutchman orders, still delights customers who feel like they are in on something special. Lindsay Snyder remains at the helm, guarding her family's legacy with fierce devotion. She has spoken openly about the tragedy and pain that shaped her life, hoping that her story might help others who struggle with similar demons. She knows that wealth does not protect against loss, that success does not prevent heartbreak, that even the most beloved American institutions can be built on foundations of suffering. But she also knows something else, that the cycle can be broken, that pain can be transformed into purpose, that a family's darkest chapters can become the fuel for compassion and change. When visitors walk through the replica of that original hamburger stand, they see the beginning of an American dream. A tiny space where a man named Harry and a woman named Esther built something that would outlast them both. Something that would survive cancer and plane crashes and drug addiction and family feuds. Something that would endure. But what they cannot see are the shadows. The childhood abuse that Harry carried with him. The addiction that claimed Guy. The grief that Esther bore as she outlived everyone she loved. The lonely teenager who inherited an empire she never asked for. The In-N-Out story is not just about hamburgers. It is about the price of the American dream. About the wounds that pass from generation to generation until someone finds the strength to heal them. About a family that lost almost everything and still found a way to feed millions of people with quality, care, and love. The burgers are still fresh, the fries are still hand-cut, the employees still smile. And somewhere, in the foundations and the charities and the carefully maintained values, Harry and Esther and Rich and even Guy live on. Their legacy written not just in corporate success, but in every child helped by the foundation, every employee treated with dignity, every customer who tastes something made with care. The homes that witnessed it all. Throughout the Snyder family's rise and fall, their homes told silent stories of triumph and tragedy. The original residence in Baldwin Park, located right across the street from the first In-N-Out stand, was modest and practical. Harry could walk to work in minutes, and the smell of sizzling burgers probably drifted through the windows on warm California evenings. It was there, in a small garage, that Harry created his revolutionary two-way speaker system, working night after night until his invention changed the fast food industry forever. By the late 1950s, as success grew, the family moved to a larger house in San Dimas, an upper-middle-class enclave in the San Gabriel Valley. This became the home where Guy and Rich spent their formative years, where they learned the family business, and where the complicated dynamics between the two brothers began to crystallize. The San Dimas house was comfortable, but not extravagant, reflecting Harry's belief that money should be invested in the business, not flaunted in personal displays of wealth. Rich Snyder eventually acquired a mansion on the coast, a testament to his success as company president. He was planning to relocate corporate headquarters to be closer to his home when the plane crash cut his life short. The move never happened. Guy's homes told a more troubled story. His first marriage produced the home where young Lindsay grew up, a place filled with both love and the anxiety of watching her father battle invisible demons. After the divorce, Guy's living situations became increasingly unstable, culminating in that final period spent in a motorhome parked inside a warehouse, surrounded by the equipment and supplies of the company he was supposed to lead. And then there was Lindsay's mansion journey, a reflection of her own complicated path to peace. In 2012, she purchased a sprawling estate in Bradbury, California, an elite equestrian community, for $17.4 million. The property had previously belonged to baseball star Adrian Beltre. Sitting on 4 acres within a gated community with 24-hour security, the nearly 19,000-square-foot mansion featured 11 bedrooms and 14 bathrooms, a movie theater, wine cellar, fitness center, and even a hair salon. The property boasted a private 2-hole golf course, tennis and basketball courts, a vineyard with fruit trees, a 6-car garage, and a 3,400-square-foot recreation center. A separate guest house offered 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms with its own garage. The main house featured an economy car-sized crystal chandelier in the foyer and a soaring 35-foot-high custom-painted ceiling. But even this palatial estate could not hold Lindsay forever. She listed it for sale in 2017 at nearly $20 million, took it off the market, then relisted it in 2021 for $16.8 million. It finally sold for $16.3 million, representing a loss from her original purchase price. The woman who owned one of America's most successful restaurant chains was moving on, proving that for the Snyders, no single place ever became a permanent home. The security that surrounded Lindsay's life was not paranoia. The kidnapping attempts she survived were real, and they forced her to live behind walls and gates that most people never experience. The wealth that her family created brought not just opportunity, but danger, turning her into a target simply because of the fortune she inherited. The original Baldwin Park location, where everything began, no longer exists in its original form. When Interstate 10 was built through the area in the 1950s, the freeway swallowed the exact spot where Harry and Esther had launched their dream. But In-N-Out preserved the spirit of that original stand, and in 2014, the replica was built to honor where everything started. The Baldwin Park headquarters, where both triumphs and tragedies unfolded, remains a sacred space for the company. It was here that a fire ravaged the facilities in 1978, forcing Esther to set up temporary accounting desks in her own home. It was here that Rich built his university and commissary. It was here that Guy hid in his motorhome during his darkest days. And it is here that the In-N-Out legacy continues, in a building that has witnessed more family drama than most soap operas could imagine. The foundation that transforms pain into purpose. Perhaps no aspect of the Snyder legacy matters more than the foundation they created. When Esther and Rich established the Child Abuse Foundation in 1984, they were not simply engaging in corporate philanthropy. They were confronting the shadows that had haunted the family for generations. Harry Snyder grew up in an abusive household. His father had suffered similar treatment. The cycle of pain extended back further than anyone could trace. But Harry, despite his own wounds, built something beautiful. And his descendants chose to use their fortune to ensure that other children might be spared the suffering that had marked their family's past. The foundation, now known as the In-N-Out Burger Foundation, provides residential treatment, emergency shelter, foster care, and early intervention for abused children. Every cent raised goes directly to these services because In-N-Out covers 100% of administrative costs. Over the decades, millions of dollars have flowed to organizations that help the most vulnerable members of society. The foundation operates in every state where In-N-Out has locations. It represents perhaps the most meaningful transformation of family pain into family purpose. The Snyders could have simply accumulated wealth. Instead, they chose to use their success to break cycles of abuse that extend far beyond their own bloodline. Lindsay expanded this mission with her Slave to Nothing Foundation, targeting human trafficking and substance abuse. These causes were not randomly chosen. She had watched addiction destroy her father. She understood that pain often drove people into situations where they were exploited or enslaved by substances. The foundation amplified the work of the original Child Abuse Foundation while addressing the specific demons that had claimed Guy's life. Proceeds from Lindsay's book about the company history benefit both foundations. Annual fundraising events, including concerts featuring the In-N-Out family band and major musical acts, generate additional support. The Snyder family fortune flows not just into restaurants and real estate, but into efforts that transform lives. This philanthropic legacy represents the ultimate answer to the family's tragic history. The abuse that Harry suffered, the addiction that claimed Guy, the pain that haunted multiple generations, all of it has been channeled into healing. Every child helped by the foundation represents a small victory over the darkness that once threatened to consume the Snyder family entirely. Looking toward tomorrow. As In-N-Out approaches its 9th decade of operation, the questions about its future multiply. Lindsay has stated repeatedly that she will never franchise the company or take it public. The only reason to do so would be money, she has explained, and money is not what drives her. But the expansion continues. New states are added to the In-N-Out map. Distribution centers are built to support growth in Colorado, Texas, and beyond. The company that Harry started with $5,000 and 100 square feet of space now operates hundreds of locations with billions in revenue. Some observers wonder how long the Snyder family can maintain control. Corporate empires often succumb to public markets eventually. Family-owned businesses frequently fragment over generations as descendants multiply and interests diverge. But In-N-Out has defied these trends for 75 years, and Lindsay shows no signs of abandoning her family's principles. The culture Harry established remains remarkably intact. Fresh ingredients, quality over quantity, employees treated as family, slow, careful expansion that never sacrifices standards for speed. Bible verses on the cups, crossed palm trees marking each location. The secret menu that makes customers feel like insiders. In an era of corporate consolidation and private equity takeovers, In-N-Out stands as an anomaly. A reminder that family businesses can survive, that quality can triumph over cost-cutting, that treating workers well can be profitable, and that values matter more than valuations. The Snyder family curse may have taken lives, but it could not take the dream. That dream still stands, one burger at a time, in over 400 locations across America. A monument to what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that excellence is impossible. Harry Snyder never lived to see his company become a billion-dollar enterprise. Esther watched both her sons die before her. Rich was cut down in his prime. Guy lost his battle with demons that had haunted him since childhood. The family paid an almost unbearable price for their success. But in every fresh hamburger patty, in every hand-cut French fry, in every employee who earns a living wage with dignity, in every child helped by the foundation, in every customer who tastes something made with genuine care, the Snyder legacy endures. The tiny hamburger stand that Harry and Esther built in Baldwin Park was never supposed to become an empire. It was just two people with a dream, working hard, treating others well, and refusing to compromise on quality. 75 years later, that same spirit animates every In-N-Out location from California to Tennessee. The homes they lived in may be sold or demolished. The family members may be gone. But what they built together, what they sacrificed for, what they believed in, that remains. Fresh, quality, family, care. That is the true inheritance of the Snyder family. Not just billions of dollars, but a set of values that have survived tragedy, addiction, death, and the corrosive temptations of success. A set of values that Lindsay guards with the same fierce determination that Harry brought to selecting produce at dawn. And that, in the end, is what a hamburger is all about.